everyone, today I'm going to be talking about the Iroquois Nationals, a lacrosse team that represents the Iroquois Confederacy, a First Nation group that lives in Canada and the US. So I'll be discussing their importance, their history, and their journey to actually compete at the Olympic Games. So let's get started. Now, if you're not in the US or Canada, you probably don't know what the Iroquois Confederacy is, so I'm gonna give a little bit of history. Now, the Iroquois, also known as the Six Nations or the Haudenosaunee, are an indigenous confederacy in kind of northeastern North America at the border of the United States and Canada. They kind of frame around some of the Great Lakes, kind of in the upper northeast of America and the kind of more southern east of Canada. Now, between 1450 and 1660, there's no specific date, and this could probably be even earlier than that, 5 distinct First Nations groups with different languages, cultures, and lands came together to create the Great League of Peace, and they would later add a sixth nation to become the Six Nations. Now, this league or Grand Council would come together to make decisions on war and peace and other things within the border of this confederacy, basically like a very small version of the UN where countries come together and have to make unanimous decisions. Now, this confederacy was established long before Europeans came to North America and started colonizing the crap out of the place. Now, parts of this confederacy are still established today with treaties with the British Crown, who are still the head of state in Canada, and the American government. There are, from the kind of latest census, about 130,000 members of this confederacy, or who identify as being part of the Haudenosaunee people. Now, what makes this confederacy different than other indigenous groups in Canada and the US is that they've actually been issuing passports to their people since 1923, and were able to travel internationally with said passport. However, with enhanced security measures that came after 9/11, those passports aren't really recognized internationally anymore, and anyone who wants to travel with one of those passports outside of the US or Canada usually has to get a visa. Now, neither Canada or the US even recognize them, even though the Confederacy is within those two countries. Now, a very surface kind of level explanation of lacrosse I'm going to be giving here. I'm going to be doing a video more in depth about the history of lacrosse and its importance to the Iroquois peoples. But kind of a general history of it here. Now, the sport of lacrosse is actually a traditional sport played by the Iroquois. The game of lacrosse is played in honor of the creator, and because of this, it's an integral part of their culture. It's later in the 19th century that a Canadian takes the game and essentially westernizes it. Now, his version of lacrosse becomes pretty popular in Canada, and it is later established as Canada's national sport. As I mentioned, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy views lacrosse as a gift from their creator. I actually got a quote from one of the articles I read from a member of the Mohawk Nation who talks about why lacrosse is important to his people and their culture, and I think it does a good job of kind of summing it up. We have a modern version now, but the medicine game was originally given to us by the creator to help us heal spiritually, physically, and mentally. It's an integral part of our culture, our lifestyle, our way of dealing with adverse things that happen sometimes in our lives. So it's a good way of helping us deal with everyday struggles and stresses. The game, of course, has changed dramatically from those times, but we continue to hold that very close to us. Now for some background on the Iroquois Nationals team. Now, this team was created in the 1980s by the Grand Council of the Haudenosaunee for a friendly competition at an NCAA tournament, which is an amateur college kind of sport organization within the US. Now, they would later compete at their first international competition only a few years later in 1990, the World Lacrosse Championships. Now, the organizing body of the Iroquois Nationals is the First Nations Lacrosse Association and is recognized by the Federation of International Lacrosse as a sovereign state. Essentially, and this means that they are able to represent themselves, not like a separate team for Canada or the US. Now, this makes them the only Indigenous peoples organization that is recognized for international competition in the entire world. So even though their confederacy is within the borders of Canada in the US, they are able to compete individually. Now, when the Iroquois Nationals joined the World Lacrosse Championships, they became the 5th team to join since it started in 1967. Other teams, the other 4 teams that were included in this were Canada, the US, Australia, and England. Now, at the 1998, the 2002, and the 2006 games, the Iroquois Nationals came in fourth. Later, at the 2014 competition, with 38 competing countries, they came in third. And third again at the 2018 competition, with 46 competing nations. Now, the Iroquois Nationals are ranked third in the world by the World Lacrosse Association, so they are considered one of the best teams internationally playing lacrosse. And the team is actually sponsored by Nike, who provide their gear and training equipment, and it's one of the few organizations that has a relationship like this with a First Nations organization or team. Other than the World Lacrosse Championships, lacrosse isn't played at a whole lot of big international competitions like the Olympic Games, Pan Am Games, that sort of thing. So it's not a very well-known sport outside of those kind of top four countries that I mentioned: Canada, the US, Britain, and Australia. However, it has lately been gaining a lot of popularity. As I mentioned, in the last competition in 2018, there were 46 competing countries who played at the World Lacrosse Championships. So in 2018, the International Olympic Committee gave lacrosse provisional status as an Olympic sport for the upcoming 2028 Los Angeles Olympic Games. As it is now a provisional sport, it will be played at the World Games, which is kind of like a trial run for different Olympic sports. So now that lacrosse is going to be a provisional Olympic sport, heading to the World Games is a really good opportunity to kind of establish where you might fall in the Olympic Games, or kind of establish how good you are at the sport internationally. However, the Iroquois Nationals have already run into some issues in regards to being able to play internationally at a level like the World Games or the Olympic Games. Now, even though they finished third at the 2018 World Lacrosse Championships, they were not included in the list for the top 8 teams for the 2022 World Games. Now, the decision caused uproar within the lacrosse community, as the third best team in the world was not going to be included in one of the top tier international competitions. The reason for this was that the World Games didn't believe the Iroquois Nationals to kind of be representing its own sovereign state or nation. So because they weren't necessarily a country, they didn't include them for the World Games. So in solidarity with the Iroquois Nationals, the Irish lacrosse team withdrew from the 2022 World Games competition and gave their spot to the Iroquois Nationals. They said they did this because the Iroquois are the creators of the game, along with one of the best teams in the world. And so not having them in the competition was, one, a disgrace to the community who invented the game, and two, not having one of the best teams in the world there, it's not going to be a good competition. So the World Games ended up putting the Iroquois Nationals back onto the roster for the 2022 World Games. Now, the Iroquois Nationals are also in the process of trying to prove to the IOC that they represent a sovereign, distinct nation from Canada and the US to compete at the Olympics, which will be a difficult road considering the IOC's history with recognizing nations or not recognizing nations to prove a point. If they are successful, however, they will be the first Indigenous group to represent themselves at the Olympic Games, which is obviously the highest, biggest sporting venue in the world. Politically speaking, however, the IOC and other powerful nations may look at this as a bit of a problem. If they start recognizing nations within powerful nations like the US and Canada, it might give other nations and/or nationalities inspiration to separate or create their own sovereign states in a way in order to try and push to have themselves recognized. And to be recognized as a nation state by the Olympic Committee gives you a pretty good international step in order to perhaps gain independence or separation from a state you are a part of, because you have been recognized as a distinct, separate nation from where you might be geographically located. So with examples like China and Taiwan, the last video that I posted, China was able to throw their weight around and demand from the IOC that Taiwan go by a whole other name and have a whole new flag in order to compete at the Olympics, just because they didn't want them there, because they were a threat in a sense to their kind of government sovereignty. So some pressure from other countries that may be having issues within their borders with nationality or certain states that are wanting to separate, they might try to squash this as to not give inspiration to other people, essentially. Now, I am all for it. From what I know, there is no other circumstance where an indigenous nation has created a sport that is now an Olympic sport and has a top international competing team in that sport. It's a bit of a special case, and I don't think you can have an international lacrosse competition without including the third ranked team, regardless of who they are or what they represent. Now, it will be a powerful symbol for decolonization and taking a step towards reconciliation to allow the Iroquois Nationals to compete at the Olympic Games. Now, I hope they get all of the support from Canada and the US, particularly the US, because if they get support from a country like the US, who is normally top tier when it comes to medals and is very powerful within the sporting world, it will be a huge help in getting them recognized by the IOC and allowing them to compete. Now, it's been thrown around that maybe this team could come to the Olympic Games and compete under the International Olympic flag. Like in the past, refugees from certain countries have come and competed. However, this would kind of go against the whole point of this indigenous group of people representing themselves at the games. If they're not able to bring their flag and represent their own confederacy, it kind of loses some of that point of them actually going out and being able to compete. A decision will be made to their addition to the tournament by 2024. So there are a few more years left for the decision to be made, and let's hope it's a positive one. So that was a very quick rundown of the Iroquois Nationals lacrosse team and their possible journey to the Olympic Games. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll be doing a more in-depth video on lacrosse in the future at some point, so I can expand my very short explanation of the significance of lacrosse to these peoples. But I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like more sport history videos, you can always subscribe. And if you want to see more about the Iroquois Nationals or some more indigenous sports, give this video a like and let me know. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks, bye.